Superintendent, what do you feel is new or different in your state's ESSA plan around accountability compared to your state's previous accountability plan under NCLB?
Well, we've been doing a lot of the pioneering work in terms of change and accountability, continuous improvement, investing more dollars in the communities, the schools that have the greatest challenges, the demographics, for instance, in poverty, kids who are English learners, foster kids. As you know, California did an historic, maybe the biggest in the nation's history, shift of billions of dollars from the general education budget to concentrate and target them to low-income communities. And so we've done that as LCFF, they call it local control funding formula. But out of an $80 billion education budget, we shifted $10 billion a year for higher concentration investment in, again, community schools with poverty, with English learner challenges, and with our foster kids. And we've been doing some of that work before. As a legislature, I'd authored an after-school program, which is the largest in the nation. We're in 4,000 schools. Again, targeting the lower deciles of students' performance so we could put the money where we think it would do the most good. We also had a pilot program. It was an investment of $3 billion over 5 years. That was a major effort to prove that when you do put funds into extra counseling and tracking attendance and looking at the whole child, looking at all the support systems needed, that you could get much stronger academic results. So that's part of where we're different. We also early on looked at demographics, the subgroups, breaking it down, looking at the data, how can we help tailor investments and learning strategies to those students in that area. So those are some of the factors that we built our ESSA plan off of, but we had started much earlier, several years back, in terms of questioning the status quo at that time and starting to invest in this kind of change.
Thank you. Mr. Deputy Superintendent, do you want to comment on that as well?
Superintendent Torlakson really nailed it. I think one thing that's, as Superintendent Torlakson indicated, that's really important to keep in mind around California is that we had already started on some really dramatic changes to our accountability system prior to the adoption of ESSA. So the local control funding formula was adopted in 2013. ESSA was referred to by President Obama as the Christmas miracle of 2015. So we already had 2 years underway with local control funding formula at the time that ESSA was adopted. And we attempted as a state under Superintendent Torlakson's and others' leadership to think about and evaluate what did we learn from our experience under not only No Child Left Behind, but our previous experiences in California with the Public School Accountability Act that was adopted in 1998 and the Academic Performance Index that came out of that. What do we need to learn from both the positives and also the negatives from those accountability systems? And one of the things we learned is that a focus on the school site as the kind of the destination of inputs and really the locus of change wasn't going to completely do the trick for us. And it kind of goes to your earlier question too about the achievement gap. If we wanted to really change the dynamics around the achievement gap, then we really needed to be thinking more about how do we create sustainable change and build capacity at the district level. So our accountability system shifted to be thinking about how can we be looking at the performance of districts, but equally important, how do we link that to support for continuous improvement? So we're not simply looking at the deficiencies of districts and schools, but providing the necessary supports that will allow them to improve.
And part of our mission going back is to reach and teach the whole child and look at all the dimensions. And so multiple measures defining what success should look like is something that we've pioneered, and we're continuing to fine tune and bring other measuring tools to the table to look at how to drive additional improvements. So generally, we've called our way the California way, and a big part of it's been teamwork. We've had the head of the teachers union, the head of the administrators association, co-chairing all of our major task force on reform, on accountability, on assessment. Our assessment program. About 3 million students went through that process, no glitches, major technological investment, but the results were built on trust and on us working together. Even where the teachers and administrators won't agree on some things, they agreed on the big picture, and we've moved forward together with their support.
I know the fact that you all created your new state accountability system, prior to the submission of your ESSA plan caused some complications in getting that plan then approved through the U.S. Department of Education. Could you talk briefly about what was going on there?
The local control accountability plan system ensures there is more accountability at the local level. And one of those things is to identify schools that are struggling for something we call differentiated assistance. That identification happens at the school level. I'm sure, as you well know, under ESSA, school identification happens at the district level. And so California was already measuring schools on multiple measures as a result of the reforms of LCFF, and we needed to take that system, the California way, which we were very proud of and very invested in. We're even showing preliminary high-quality results for, and make it fit into the ESSA box. And I will admit it was challenging. We were the 50th of 51 states and territories to be approved for our state plan, but really through some strong collaboration with the U.S. Department of Education, I think we were able to reach a point where both parties may not have always had the same interpretation of statute, but it could agree on a way that we could continue both our state system and meet the requirements of the federal law. And so we are working to align the two systems of school identification so that they follow the same timelines and have similar reporting structures, so that it's frankly less of so that there isn't a separate state and federal system, so that districts don't have to fill out a state form and a federal form. We're trying to work so at the local level, the reforms and supports they need are what they're receiving, and they spend less attention worrying about, okay, I have this federal thing to do over here and the state thing to do over here, which frankly was a consequence of the old No Child Left Behind in our state accountability systems. We had the API and AYP that districts had to think about. And thankfully, through negotiations with the U.S. Department of Education, we now just have a single system that the public and districts will use.
You just mentioned the California way, and I wondered if you could speak about which feature or features of your state's ESSA plan you think is most unique or distinctive, different compared to how other states are approaching ESSA.
Well, one thing, we're creating a whole system of support, multiple layers. The different agencies that are responsible for education funding and oversight, to bring those agencies together so they coordinate, they synergistically invest their time. So we have the State Board of Education, as you know, appointed by the governor for California. We have my department. We have the County Association of County Superintendents for the 58 counties. And we have an agency called the CPRE, the California Collaborative for Education Excellence, where we've actually invested now about $30 million in extraordinary efforts to come in and do pilot projects, to do research, to go in and assist schools that are in trouble, that want help, and then developing, again, this coordinated system of support, this team effort. And we also rely a lot to get this started, not just on the assessment data, but on the development of the local accountability plan. So one of the key features of the California reform, the California way, is to have more local control, trust the districts more, but give them the resources to invest and to set their priorities. And I've found, traveling up and down California, up and down the state, that administrators, school board members, parents are enthused about the local planning process, where they get a chance to voice their priorities, their concerns, so that they can be incorporated into the school district's spending plan for the next year. And if we find, and this is where the system of support comes in, if we find a school district is off track of what's in their own plan that they have adopted, we are there to help, to offer assistance. The county superintendents can refer different agencies to the Board of Education, to CCE, and to our department. So there's this system of support that's rather extraordinary
One of the unique features that began with the local control funding formula, but really is supporting our work to implement the Every Student Succeeds Act, is a component of the local control funding formula that we call concentration grants. So schools and districts that have high proportions of 3 student populations, and it's an unduplicated pupil count of disadvantaged students, English learners, and foster youth. They essentially receive a concentration grant or more funds to support those at-risk student populations. And so that funding has been coming to districts for a few years now. And I think in addition to the Title I and other federal resources, it's really helped districts that may have higher need populations just have more resources to do the work that they need to improve achievement and other indicators.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Marguerite. And I think it's really important to keep in mind the scope and scale of that effort. I mean, literally that moved $10.8 billion into work supporting the needs of our most disadvantaged students. So really, when you look at it, and you look at it in comparison to other states, and even to our nation as a whole, it is the largest equity play that's ever been made in our nation to move that scale of resource. $10.8 billion per year, serving, as Marguerite mentioned, low-income English learner and foster youth students, and concentrating those funds in the hands of districts where the largest concentrations and percentages of those student groups. I think the other big picture feature that's really important to keep in mind is that California is very, very serious about multiple measures and very serious about looking at the whole child. And this became a point of discussion with the Department of Education and the ESSA statute, which called for a proportionate or an overproportionate representation of academic measures within the system of identification. But we have built up very patiently over a number of years as a state our dashboard, which is using very significantly academic measures, but also other measures that provide us with a picture of the whole child. And that feature has carried forward very significantly in the dashboard that we're using for accountability and more importantly for continuous improvement. Another area that's been I think an innovation in terms of California's accountability system has been the use of both status and change for our indicators. That we're, as Superintendent Torlakson mentioned, we're believers that the real action is in the change. The action is in the improvement. So wherever you're starting from, the important piece is where are you going? How are you improving and how are we measuring that? So being able to look at both the objective measure of status and the change over time and combine that into an indicator is, I think, a significant feature of the dashboard in California's accountability system, and became another point of discussion with the United States Department of Education around how that would work.
Certainly the large new investments that California is putting into education in general and into some of these low-performing districts is, as you note, unusual, right, if we look across the rest of the country. So that certainly is part of what makes California distinctive and also, as you all just alluded, raises hope, right, that we make more progress in California on some of these achievement gaps. I wonder, though, ESSA, does roll back federal control or mandates around accountability and decentralize some of that authority to the state level. Many states, as you just indicated, like California, have responded by in turn decentralizing or devolving some authority around accountability to local school districts. That has raised concerns among the folks nationally that are concerned about equity and achievement gaps. That decentralization from federal to state and from state to local may result rather not in progress towards reducing achievement gaps, but rather actually exacerbate these gaps. How would you respond to those concerns or those critics?
We think the California way is working. We're seeing statistical results already, some academic improvement where we've invested more resources. And yes, there'll be debate about is the letter of detail that's in the local adopted plan being implemented. We're pushing from our position, and we're pushing with the whole team of support for transparency and for openness in looking at the budget and how the money is invested, and believe there's a natural and invaluable mechanism where it's important for the public to interact and get involved in the details of the budget and get involved in the details of setting priorities in the accountability plan. So I think those are partly an answer to that concern that you're hearing.
And as Marguerite mentioned as well, and building on Superintendent Torlakson's comments, we're starting to see some really strong evidence that this new way is working. High school graduation rates are up with gaps closing. Advanced placement course participation rates are up with gaps closing. Scores of 3 or above on advanced placement tests are up with gaps closing. Admission rates to California State University are up with gaps closing. Admissions to University of California are up with gaps closing. NAEP scores, particularly in 4th grade, are up with some gaps closing. We've got a long way to go, but we're starting to see some evidence that we're on the right track. And we know this is a long-term marathon that we're in. It's not a sprint. This is going to take a while. These problems weren't created yesterday, and they're not going to get solved in the immediate. By contrast, Dr. McGuinn, if you look at the results of No Child Left Behind, and we seriously look at how well did we do by simply developing and publicizing an accountability system which provided a way to look at data without accompanying it with the result with the supports that were necessary to grow and improve, and without empowering local communities to be able to make the kinds of changes that they needed to make. Not very well. So we need to go back and look at, well, how well did our country do? How well did our state do? How well did our communities do under No Child Left Behind and some of our state systems? Not very well. Yet we're starting to see some success with this more decentralized way. And part of the key, as Superintendent Torlakson mentioned, is that our state leadership has been able to keep a guiding coalition together of our essential stakeholders in education, with equity as the driver. So we've got, as Superintendent Torlakson mentioned, our teachers associations, our administrators associations, our parent groups, our school board association, our administrator association, our county superintendents, all in consensus around this new direction, and that's really been helpful as well.
And I can add that this is not only reflected in the results in the classrooms. Results, by the way, that come also at a time of increasing poverty. So we have more families, more children in poverty. So while we're making these gains, we're also having more English learners coming into the system. They're good. We need to concentrate even more resources to helping those students learn English proficiently, maintain their original native tongue, and be bilingual. So those are really positive. The other positive thing is the public has kept voting yes. They vote to invest. Prop 51 was $9 billion for school improvements. Prop 55 was $7 billion a year ongoing support for our public schools. 165 school districts went to their voters, went to their public to ask to invest in other kinds of improvements, and some of that is operational, but most of it was capital and maintenance and building new facilities. 95% of those measures passed, representing $16 billion of additional investment. And then an area that we think the public is grateful about and interfaces with the motivation and keeping kids in school and graduation rates. We've really pushed much bigger focus on CTE, career technical education, hands-on learning, practical learning, where students see why in their classroom they're seeing why they're studying math and why they're needing to learn to write well and speak well, because it's part of a career that they're looking at entering. In the career pathways, we see those students graduating at about 95% rate. So we've gone from 72 to 82% general student body in California, but for the subset that has really concentrated career technical education opportunities, we're seeing more like a 95, 97% graduation rate.
You've just talked about large and sustained new investments in education, political a consensus around education reform, public support for a focus on equity, a sustained coalition that's been built and continues to work together politically. This is not the norm in the United States. In other states, each of those particular things has proven very difficult. And so what's the secret sauce behind the California way? How have you all been able to do this in a way that seems elusive in so many other states across the United States?
I think that there's a number of answers to that question, and I think we would be remiss in saying that we feel like we have the answer. We know that we have a long way to go in California. Mm-hmm. There's many more miles for us to travel on this road before I think we'll be satisfied with where we're at. But one reason, and speaking as someone who's been involved in public education in California for about 35 years now, what I've seen in the last 7-8 years is an unprecedented level of aligned political leadership has been one factor. So the fact that Superintendent Torlakson has a very strong working relationship with the president of the state school board, Dr. Michael Kurz, who is appointed by the governor, our legislature, all aligned basically. And there's some areas where we disagree, obviously, but on the big picture items, as Superintendent Torlakson mentioned earlier, we've been in agreement, and that's allowed us to push forward some of these big items. That didn't happen by accident. Superintendent Torlakson has invested a lot of time in relationships with the state board and with the governor's office and with the legislature. Of course, coming out of the legislature was a factor. But we've, in some ways been lucky in that regard as well to have that. Whereas, obviously, we certainly don't see that at a national level right now, that kind of ability to move on big picture items. And I don't see it in a lot of states either.
Something I'm known for is I go around the state and give talks to different groups and visit schools and administrators and teachers. I was a high school track and cross country coach for 25 years. So I go with the team theme, the power of team, which I just go through it. How do you spell team? T-E-A-M, and what's it stand for? Together, everyone accomplishes more. And that's been an overriding theme of everybody's voice is important. Everybody deserves to be heard with respect, and then do the best we can to address concerns together. I think part of the answer to your question is driving it is where you see us investing previously and looking at studies in other parts of the country, investing and seeing positive results, fewer dropout rates, fewer kids lost, dropping out to drugs and gangs, losing faith, losing hope, not feeling that school is for them. When we see those programs working, we see here's a model that we just want to expand and invest more in. And then on the other side of it was the negative drivers. NCLB, test and punish. And teachers were frustrated with that. Parents were frustrated with that. Getting just a ridiculous set of guidelines that came that showed all schools, failing schools, defined under the old system. It was extremely frustrating to administrators, parents, and teachers. And so that was part of the motivation to do better and get our act together as a team. That was driven by the negative consequences of the previous paradigm.